Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to let people are logging in right now, so I'm going to give them a minute or two, and we'll plan on starting about 2 minutes after the hour. So super excited to have you guys. Hang tight for a second. I'll let people log in. All right. It looks like we have a pretty stable number of attendees, so we'll go ahead and jump in now. Welcome to our webinar, guys. I'm super excited that you're all here. My name is Dr. Ramirez. I'm grateful to be joined by two of our really spectacular tutors. We have Matthew Momgen and Rebecca Lynn here, and they're here to share their own expertise. And they have a lot of expertise, not only with tutoring, but also with the USMLE and COMLEX. And so really grateful to have both their perspectives here. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll give them a second to introduce themselves, but just a reminder, we're going to be really focused on step 1 and level 1 today. So how can you set yourself up for success for both of these exams? Just a few things to take care of right now. This will be recorded. It will be provided to you later. So if you miss something, you'll be able to get it again later. And then at the end of this, we're going to do a Q&A. So you're going to have a chance to get kind of a personalized, individualized approach to your questions for both from myself, Rebecca, and Matthew. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A function. We'll kind of gather them up, and then at the end, we'll have a chance to go through most of them, hopefully all of them, and you can get some really great expertise on your own individual situation. So let's just dive on in. So like I said, my name is Dr. Ramirez. I'm the director of medical school tutoring here at MedSchoolCoach. I've been involved in medical education now for nearly 10 years, and have been involved in education for probably more than 15 years at this point, teaching and tutoring in various different situations. I've also been a USMLE tutor here as well, and I have the opportunity to oversee a group of really spectacular elite tutors who provide you guys all with some excellent expertise and some help. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it off here to Matthew, who's going to tell you a little bit about himself and his experience as well.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Matthew. I am a tutor with MedSchoolCoach, current fourth-year osteopathic medical student at Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. I did take both step 1 and level 1, so I'll kind of be helping out with, especially with the level 1 side of things. Currently a fourth year, so I'm applying into anesthesiology. A little bit about my background with MedSchoolCoach. I've been with MedSchoolCoach for almost 5 years now. Started out as an MCAT tutor, and then started doing, USMLE and COMLEX tutoring throughout the years. I'm really excited to share with you guys what we have to offer tonight, and hope that you can start to set up your plan for, success on step 1 and level 1. Rebecca?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca. I graduated from Johns Hopkins, and now I'm a medical student at WashU in St. Louis. I'm in my fourth year of medical school as well, and I'm applying into ophthalmology. In terms of education, I have been a tutor for over 11 years, and I've been with MedSchoolCoach for just over 4 years. Again, started with MCAT and recently transitioned into USMLE. And we're really happy that you were able to join us today.
Awesome. Just a rock star group. Also, Matthew was also an MCAT tutor. So you're working with two people here who have just a really incredible amount of teaching and tutoring experience, and also have a lot of experience with both level 1 and step 1. So I really want to encourage you guys to get those questions in, and we'll have a chance to kind of get to each of them. So this is a little bit of an overview about what we're going to do today. So we'll talk about, just step 1, level 1, even matter anymore? It's pass, fail. Should we care? How do we choose resources for these exams? How do we create an effective study plan? How do we then execute that plan? When you should take these exams, one or both of them. And at the end, we'll talk a little about kind of what we do at MedSchoolCoach and how we help our students. And then we'll finish off with the Q&A, which will be a really great opportunity for you guys to get your question answered by these experts. So, this is a great question. Does step 1 and level 1 even matter anymore? It's pass fail. Why should we care? You have a lot of things to care about. You're busy, you're stressed. Why should we care about this? And so, I really caution people against just, sweeping under the rug. I think that there's a few reasons why it matters. The first is you do need to pass on your first attempt, ideally. And I think this is really critical. And I think it's really easy to get so comfortable that that's pass fail that you don't put an adequate amount of effort in. And sometimes that something slips through the cracks and you have to retake it, which is really something we want to try to avoid. And I think really the most important thing is that, step one, level one really help you really assess your understanding of the fundamentals of medicine. I agree, some of it's very basic sciencey and some of it feels like it is not pertinent, but I will tell you that a lot of what you're learning and a lot of what you're testing on are really the building blocks of medical knowledge. And this is really important for a few things. One, you're trained to be a doctor. You want to learn these things. And I think not all of it, but a lot of it will actually be applicable as you move through your medical education and your medical training. And then from a really functional standpoint, step one and level one are pass fail, sure. Step two and level two are not. And they're still being graded. And not only are they being graded, but in some ways, there's just a tremendous amount of pressure put on these exams now because it's your one scored exam. And so although step one, level one are now pass fail, step two is just this huge high risk exam where you want to make sure you score as high as you can. And we know that people who do better with step one and level one are more likely to score higher on step two and level two. So with that in mind, one thing that you might want to avoid is now that step one, level one is pass fail, you don't care about that. You think all of a sudden you're just going to try to learn everything for step two and you're going to score really high. I caution you against that because I think that you'd be surprised by how much overlap there is between step one, level one and step two, level two. And I think that if your ultimate goal is to score high on step two and level two, so you can present a competitive applicant for residencies, I think you want to start with step one and level one. I agree. There's certainly a lot less stress that it's pass fail, but I think that we should really still take it really seriously and approach it as like a way for us to learn and also to set ourselves up for success in the future. So that's just my blurb there, and that's what I think about that. But I still think it's a pretty important exam. So I will pass this off to Rebecca now, who is going to share a little bit about her experience on how you choose step one resources. There's so many things available. Where should we start? What did you use, Rebecca, and how do you guide your students?
Thanks for handing that off. So I'll just start with a broad overview and then I'll talk a little bit about what I did. So just as a broad concept, when you're studying for step one, you want to pick at least one resource to learn the content knowledge and then one resource to test yourself using questions. Of course, most students will not just pick one from each category, but that's the bare minimum, right? So in terms of content resources, you have the first aid book, you have Pathoma, either the book or the videos. Sketchy is really popular, especially Sketchy Micro, Sketchy Farm, as well as the Boards and Beyond videos. But there's so many other resources out there. There's Pixarize, Dirty Medicine, Osmosis, many more that I have not named. And honestly, it does get a little bit overwhelming sometimes when you're trying to figure out which content resources you should use to prepare. And so I have that as my key point down below, but I just want to address that now, that the most important thing is to figure out what works for you. It's not going to be possible for you to watch all of the videos of all of these different resources, right? And it's probably also not like financially the best choice either. So I think you can definitely try out a few of these resources and see what resonates the most with you and what you think will help you succeed and retain the information. For me, I really liked first aid and I really liked Dirty Medicine. I was maybe one of the outliers that didn't do much Pathoma and didn't do much Sketchy, but that's what I'm saying is every student is very different in what works for them. Next, with the question resources.
I have one question for you. You mentioned, choose one content source. If one content source is good, are 5 content sources 5 times better?
Not necessarily, right? Because if you're not getting anything new from each resource, then it's just going to be a drain on your time and it's going to perhaps limit the time that you have to do the questions, which I would argue are even more important than doing all of the content resources, right? Because Honestly, a lot of these content resources are going to give you similar information, but just packaged a little bit differently. And what you're going to use to actually tell if you're understanding the information or not is by testing your knowledge with those questions. But
Yeah.
that's a great point.
I think the thing that I see most is that like there's what I see more frequently is students having way too many resources. Like they come, they said, I have all these books, I have all these videos, I've like kind of dabbled in all of them, but I'm totally lost. So I think that super valuable perspective here. I think you really want to be selective in ultimately what you choose to look at.
I agree with you, Joel. I think another thing a lot of times we see with our clients is when you're spread between so many resources, you're really only understanding things at a relatively shallow level. So that means your weak spots remain your weak spot in every single resource you're looking at. So you definitely using more than one resource is fine, but pick one that you're going to do really well. Then you can always supplement with other ones. It's probably valid. But make sure you do one thoroughly because those weak spots subconsciously you're going to skip over it. You're not going to put
Right.
in the time you need because, oh, I got to do this other thing instead. Yeah.
Right. And then people feel like, gosh, I spent all day studying, but I went through the cardiology chapter through 3 different books and I skipped over all the stuff that I was painful and I didn't really want to deal with. So I agree.
Yes, all excellent points. And I think that, sometimes it is true that if you're not understanding the information correctly in one resource, then maybe you should try a different one just because maybe the way that it's presented in that resource will actually resonate with you. But you have to take care to not try to be over ambitious and do everything because that's also going to burn you out. And then moving on to the question resources. Of course, we all know UWorld. UWorld is the gold standard. We do recommend that students try to do as much of UWorld as possible. Some students even are able to reset the questions and try to do them a second time. And that's because there have actually been studies that have shown that the more unique questions that a student has been exposed to, that is positively correlated with their score, back when step 1 was scored. But it is still the case, especially for step 2 CK. And then another question source is AMBOSS, and then some practice exams from the NBME, which are called CBSSA exams. It's like comprehensive basic science student self-assessment. So those are great as well. But overall, I think it's just really important to figure out which resources are the best for you, right? So similar to the content, you're not going to be able to do all of UWorld, all of AMBOSS, and all of the CBSSA exams unless you have maybe a ton of time for dedicated and you're really motivated. So I think that it's just do what you can do and try your to get through those questions and really test yourself on that material. But also give yourself some grace for perhaps if you don't finish some of the AMBOSS questions, that's okay, right? People do perfectly well with never touching AMBOSS and taking step 1.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about the level 1 resources for my DO friends in the audience. And I will take a little bit of credit from Rebecca. Our friend Dirty Medicine is a DO and his content is extremely relevant for level 1. So, in terms of level 1, you're going to want to augment your step 1 studying with at least one OMM specific content source and one question source, which probably isn't going to be OMM specific, but it's going to cover level 1. Similar logic, right? You want to learn the material, but you also want to be exposed in a setting where you're going to be challenged and find your weak spots, find places where you can go back, refresh, improve your understanding, etc. In terms of content, most people tend to use either the Savarese OMT review book, which I've put a picture of here. This is called the Green Book. It's not too long, and it's a good kind of compact review of the OMT and osteopathic philosophy that you need to know for the COMLEX exams. Dirty Medicine has a great playlist. It's like an OMT review course. I think it's like 15 videos or something, and it probably takes you like 3 or 4 hours to get through. That's another thing I really recommend to people because I think he has some really good mnemonics and good kind of way of approaching the material that would help you get a good refresh, a high level refresh, right? This is not for the person who's learning OMM for the first time in your, M1 and M2 years, but when you're coming up to level 1 and you need a refresher of the material, I think it does a really good job at that. Typically for questions, I recommend either ComBank, which is also AKA TrueLearn, or ComQuest. Now, I want to caution you guys, there are other resources out there that have OMM questions, and they're not bad, but the density and number of questions is not really what you need to prepare for level 1, such as UWorld and Kaplan. I do still recommend that even for students who are only taking level 1, I do usually still recommend doing UWorld because the questions are really good. But the little section of OMM on UWorld is not going to be enough to prepare you for the OMM specific questions. So for that reason, you're going to want to use ComBank or ComQuest.
Matthew, in your
Yes.
experience, would you recommend, say if someone really only had time for like one question bank and they're only preparing for level 1, would you recommend that they do UWorld and then ComBank or ComQuest OMM questions only? So you're focusing on UWorld for all the questions and then just picking out the OMM questions from ComBank or ComQuest. Is that something you see folks do?
Yeah, I do see people doing that. I think that's definitely a valid strategy. I also think if you only have time for one QBank and you're only doing level 1, it is okay to just do ComBank or ComQuest. The questions are pretty good and they are pretty reflective of level 1. In my experience, a lot of the people we are working with here tend to be pretty high achievers, and a lot of times they're looking to also take step 1. So that kind of delves with the UWorld there. I would definitely say you can be prepared with level 1 with just those QBanks, but maybe not optimally recommended.
Okay. And if it was just, if you're taking step 1 and level 1, in that case, do you think that that's a more reasonable strategy?
Absolutely. If you're taking step 1, or if you're taking step 1, you cannot do just ComBank or ComQuest. You have got to do UWorld.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The style of the questions is just a little different. The amount of like depth of questions of like second, third order tends to maybe be one step further on the USMLE exams. I would definitely not recommend someone take step 1 not having done or having only done ComBank or ComQuest. Yeah.
Great.
And I think for a lot of our DO students, instead of doing something like AMBOSS questions in addition to UWorld, a lot of times they'll do ComQuest in addition to UWorld or TrueLearn in addition to UWorld. In terms of practice material, this is kind of a point of contention. In my experience, most even DO school administrators will admit that the ComSci practice exams are really not good exams. There are a couple options out there. For people who are taking step 1, definitely do the NBME CBSSA exams like Rebecca was talking about. If you're only taking level 1, you probably will want to do 1 to 2 ComScis. ComQuest has a full-length practice test that's relatively new, but the full-length exam options are just not that good. And the ComScis, the big problem, and one of the things at MedSchoolCoach, one of our philosophies is that you really can only learn by getting questions wrong and figuring out how to avoid making that mistake again. ComScis can't be reviewed. So your opportunity to improve on your weak spots is 0. For that reason, they're just not very helpful to most students. A lot of the DO schools will require you to take 1 or 2 to show that you're ready. But other than that, I don't really wholesale recommend them. And you can go to the next slide, Joel. So we kind of covered some of this already. In terms of integrating both, level 1 does have to be your priority. You won't be able to graduate without it. Step 1 is a nice bonus on top and probably recommended for a lot of people, depending on the specialty, but it is that. It's a bonus. You don't need it to graduate. There are a lot of resources for step 1. So I kind of mentioned a lot of people are going to focus on like UWorld, first aid, et cetera, and then supplement with an OMM question source and an OMM content source. Try to work in your OMM longitudinally throughout your study session. Don't save it all for the end, right? Do some OMM every week to help stay fresh. And if you had trouble in your preclinical grades, if you had trouble on exams, you may want to focus on just prepping for level 1 first and then go for step 1 once you've secured the pass. Like it or not, studying for both exams is an added stress. They are different. There is additional content and kind of different expectations. So for someone who maybe had to remediate coursework or really struggled in their first 2 years, that may be a valid option.
All right, I'm going to talk about creating an effective study plan. So first things first, you have to figure out, when do I get the time to study? Because every school gives you a different dedicated study period. And within that study period, sometimes it's before your clinical rotations, sometimes it's after clinical rotations. That might also change your approach to when you start studying. If you personally feel that your dedicated study period is not long enough, so say it's a month, but you think you might need a little bit longer than that, then maybe you have to start preparing while you're also in classes. And then you have to figure out, well, what is feasible for me to start doing while I'm also studying for my school exams at the same time. After you get those logistics, then I would work on a daily schedule. And again, I really want to emphasize that for every student, this plan is going to be different to how you learn. Some people maybe don't do well with a really structured hour by hour schedule. Some people might need that in order to stay on track. Some people might need something in the middle. So that's kind of like what I have on the slide. Maybe you can plan, okay, every day I'm going to watch X amount of videos. I'm not going to say exactly I need to watch video ABC, but I want to be in the ballpark of watching 3 to 4 videos or something like that. And then I want to spend however much time doing my content review. And I want to try to do however many question blocks a day. Like Matthew was just mentioning, at MedSchoolCoach, we really think it's important to review your questions thoroughly. So I want to emphasize that here as well. You want to give yourself enough time to thoroughly review the questions and figure out what you're getting wrong. And especially with UWorld, a big reason why it's such a great resource is because the answer explanations are so detailed. Oftentimes there will be pictures, there will be an explanation for every single wrong answer in detail. And you can use that as a study resource because you can say, oh, I picked answer choice C, but it was wrong because of 1, 2, or 3 reasons, and I'll remember those reasons for next time. So it's kind of like, bear with me here, I almost think of UWorld as like a bigger Anki card almost. So like maybe it's like a 5 Anki cards in one or something like that, because every single wrong answer choice also has in a learning opportunity for you. And finally, I
And
want to make
great,
sure,
even the wrong answers have like great explanations and figures and stuff. Totally.
yeah, exactly. And I would love to hear your insight too on creating a study schedule, because every student, like I said, just has different preferences. And if there's anything that you've learned in your time being a tutor too.
One question that comes up a lot, and I would love to get actually both your guys' perspective, Rebecca and Matthew, is how long one should study. This is like maybe one of the most commonly asked questions that I get. When you think about that and you get that question, how do you approach that for each of your students? We'll start with Rebecca.
Sure. So again, this is going to be a little bit different based on when the student is taking the exam and how much time they have to study. So for example, when I was taking step 1, my school actually tells students to take it after clinical rotations, and we get a month of dedicated for step 1 and a month for step 2. That was fine for me. But for some of my classmates, for example, a month was not enough time because they were thinking, oh, I did my clinical rotations, but I really don't remember a lot of this basic science knowledge. So then they had to use some other, let's say, research block or vacation block to increase that dedicated study time. And so it's a little bit hard to estimate off the bat, but I will say you have to be really honest with yourself about where your baseline content knowledge is. And for example, at the beginning of your dedicated study period, you could just take a practice test and see what you're getting. If it's extremely far away from passing, then you know maybe I need to try to plan out a little bit more time. But again, I would love to hear Matthew's insights too on this.
Yeah, Rebecca, I think Dr. Ramirez, kind of your point. Like, it sounds like if you're looking for like a hard answer, I'd say like minimum 4 weeks, right? Depends on the student, may need to be a lot longer. I would not plan on taking it in less than 4 weeks of dedicated, because at the end of the day, it's still a test that you have to pass. I don't know what your experience has been, Dr. Ramirez or Rebecca, but I hear that pass rates are going down because people are not taking it as seriously. So really something that you want to get it right the first time you go in. And I think for a lot of people that ends up looking like a 4-week dedicated preceded by 4 to 6 weeks of content review during whatever they're doing. Maybe a lighter course load towards the end of the year, maybe a rotation that might not have a shelf exam that you can kind of try to get some studying done. Really depends on when your school is doing it. But I don't think the change to pass fail really substantially changes the amount of study time. I think the old logic is kind of still there, like 1 to 2 months, really.
I think that's accurate as well. I think one of the most important things is just we need to be like brutally honest with yourself too. Like, what is like your experience in medical school been like? Have you sailed through your classes or have you struggled? And then what's your experience with standardized tests, right? Are you someone who, smashed the SAT and smashed the MCAT, or has that been something that you've struggled with and you know that standardized tests are not your strength? So I think you have to be in tune to that a little bit. Taking practice exams, I think, are really helpful. But I also agree. I think with it moving past fail, I feel pretty comfortable if folks can take 4 to 6 weeks really seriously. Most folks, I think, can find themselves in a passing range. Something else that comes up often as well. We talked about resources a little bit ago. One thing that people often ask is like, should I be like cracking open first aid on day one and like annotating and like preparing in that sense? What are your guys' thoughts on that? Have you seen people do that successfully? Do you ever suggest students you work with early on to start opening up, some step one, level one resources in like the first year or before? What are your guys' thoughts?
I didn't personally do that. I've had some clients who told me they do that, and I have some classmates who did that. And I'll put it this way, I don't think any of them regretted it. I think it helped them a lot to focus and prioritize on what was the most important information throughout the preclinical years. If I could go back, yeah, I probably would have done that because I think it can only help you. Um, at the worst case, it doesn't make a difference, right? It's not really going to hurt you. But I do think there's validity to being exposed to and identifying the important material early so that you can be attuned to it. What do you think, Rebecca?
I would definitely agree. I personally did not touch first aid until my dedicated study period. And during that time, I thought, wow, this book is so long. I'm really using it as a reference book, right? So if I'm getting a question wrong, I'm going back to first aid, I'm reading that chapter. But I can't say that I read the whole book cover to cover. And I think that it would have helped me if I had been exposed to those materials early. I think that, of course, it has to be manageable with your current course load. But what students often don't realize until they get to dedicated is that your school is probably not going to cover everything that's on the step one exam. Like, it's just not possible. No matter how great your curriculum is, there are going to be little details that you just need to learn on your own. And finding that time to read first aid early on could help you just. I've seen this before. I vaguely remember it, and it'll be easier for me to learn it again later. But only, again, if you do feel like this is feasible for you and that you do have time for it.
Yeah, totally. I think one thing that I would emphasize is certainly don't stress about it. I think sometimes people feel this like incredible pressure of like, I need to be studying for my medical course. Oh, and I'm supposed to be finishing first aid right now. I think it's a great thing to have with you and to peek through and to crack open and get a sense of what is going to be expected of you in a couple of years. But I will encourage you not to stress out about it. And I will say that even if you just learn the content that's in front of you really well, you'll probably still be in a fine position to pass. So okay to use it. If you use it, try not to stress out too much about it. But I think, your last point here, Rebecca, I think is super important, making sure to give yourself time to rest. What does that look like for you and your students? Is there like a go-to amount of time that you suggest for people, or is it a case-by-case basis?
Absolutely. That's my favorite point on this slide. It's really important to give yourself time to decompress, time to do the things that you like doing for fun, just time to hang out with your friends, and just recharge a little bit, because studying is really stressful and it can be really isolating as well, especially if you're not doing anything else for like a 4 to 6 week time period. And what that looks like for me and my students is I try to give every student 1 day per week that I don't assign them any work. And I say, this is just a general catch up day for you. You can do a little bit of studying, but this is really your day to kind of take off if you need to, because I have the philosophy that if you're somebody that is getting that time to recharge, that is going to keep your mood up and keep your energy level up for when you actually are doing those full days of studying that will become more productive because you're fresh and you're ready to study. Any thoughts from you, Matthew?
Something a really hard thing to like wrap your mind around is like, I'm like so dedicated to doing great at this. Like I want to like keep working on it, but you'll be shocked that, I think burnout's real. And I see folks who have like great intentions, who are like, I'm gonna study all day, every day, because I'm really committed to doing well and to ensuring that I pass. But I'd be shocked after like almost cue like every 6 to 7 days, they're like, oh, I got so burnt out, I just had to take a day off. And it's like, well, at that point, you're better off just setting your own expectation and taking a day off a week and feeling better about that expectation. And I think that investing in yourself and that kind of and keeping yourself healthy, I totally agree with you, Rebecca. I think is really important actually for you to do better on the exam. It sounds counterintuitive, but I definitely agree.
Yeah, I think something I see a lot of times, sometimes we see as people are getting towards the end of their long, um, dedicated periods. Especially I see this sometimes with people who had to move their exams. They'll get to this point where maybe we're meeting together and they're like, oh my gosh, like my UWorld averages are like tanking, like I'm doing terrible. I'm like, you're burning out. Like you haven't forgotten everything in the last week. Your brain is completely shot. And I agree with Dr. Ramirez. I definitely at the beginning, I personally try to say, one day, totally off. And then maybe I negotiate from there. Sometimes you're like, oh, I want to do some catch up. I'm like, okay, like you can do a little bit, but I really need you to take that day to recharge yourself. Because med school is not a sprint, right? It's not done after step one and level one. There's more to come. There's always going to be more to come as a physician. There's going to be other board exams and all kinds of stuff to do. So setting those effective habits early to allow yourself to perform at your peak, but also keep yourself in a sustainable position for the long term, totally critical.
I think that, all super great points. And, you've made it this far. So you've selected your resources, you've made your study plan, and there's the next step, which is actually executing the plan. And, this sounds like, maybe the simplest part, but I think this is where like a lot of the turbulence comes from. People get excited, they get their books, they choose their resource, they write their plan, and I think the turbulence happens during the process. So I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot that goes into someone's experience as they study and as they kind of go through this turbulence. But I think there's a few important things to keep in mind. I think the first thing is just you really want to be consistent, and you can feel frustrated early on that you're not making the progress that you want to make, or maybe you're taking your practice exams and they're not where you want to be. But you have to kind of know that it's not going to happen overnight. Not going to happen in a week. Like that's why your study period is 4 to 6 weeks. And if you are consistently studying, 8 to 12 hours, most like 6 or 7 days of the week for 4 weeks, then you will see progress. I think that that's really important to keep in mind. And you don't want to start jumping around, try something one day, try something the other day. You really want to try to commit to what you had planned, your resources, your plan, and consistently kind of attack them. And I think that also being disciplined, I would say, you really want to be tenacious and resilient. It's really tough. And you take your practice exams, or you do your blocks, and it's like 30%. How does that happen? And and that's just kind of everyone's experience. And the content that you're learning is very challenging. It is not easy. And I think it really pays to be tenacious and resilient, to show up every day and to put effort in, and to consistently put that effort in, and to try not to be discouraged, because it's really easy to be discouraged. So, Rebecca also mentioned getting isolated, and it's really easy to feel that way. So you really want to be tenacious and resilient. think you also really want to be flexible. As Matthew had mentioned, sometimes your plan doesn't work out as possible and you have to shift your days around a bit. And you just have to accept that and own that. And same in that first week of studying, like maybe you way overcommitted and you're just like, I can't, this is like a 20-hour day. This is not like a 10-hour day. And then early on, you need to be flexible and adaptable and recognizing your own limitations, maybe in your ability to make your way through content. So I think that that's really important. Avoid comparing yourself with other people. I can't tell you how often I hear or see it saying, oh, well, I was doing this book, but then I saw Rebecca was using this book. So then I cracked that book open. And the next day I saw Matthew was using this book. So then I got that book too. It's really easy to constantly be comparing yourself to other people and to what other people are doing. And I think you really want, in this case, to focus on yourself and your plan. Don't compare yourself with others. Oh, Matthew got 95% on his UWorld block, and I'm getting 65%. I think that you really would just need, that's not a productive way to kind of go through your study period. And I think at that point, it really is actually unproductive. So try to put blinders on and focus on doing what you need to do. Again, Rebecca really emphasized this, but incorporate time off and make sure you have some time for yourself. I think that is a critically important piece that is often overlooked. So I think this is a really important question. I get this question all the time. I'm taking step 1, I'm taking level 1. Like, when do I take do I take them like days apart? Do I take them a month apart? Matthew has done both. And what do you think, Matthew? What did you do? And then how do you guide your students?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, Dr. Ramirez, you kind of alluded to this earlier. I think you said it. It might have been you, Rebecca, about being honest with your performance to date, right? If you're the type of student that did, good to great on your MCAT, you've done fine with your preclinicals, I would say the most popular option, and what I did, is take step first, cram OMM, and then take level 1, like between 4 days to a week later. The reason for that is we kind of talked about earlier how most of the practice tests, a lot of the practice material, content sources is really geared for step 1. So kind of prepping for that as like your main exam and peppering in the OMM like we were talking about. You're still going to do weekly OMM leading up to it. And then taking those few days after step 1 to just do, a lot of times what I'll tell people to do is, okay, now go into ComBank, and they have a feature where you can pick only the OMM questions. It's like 250 questions, and just do all of those questions, redo all your incorrects, and there you go. Now you just reviewed all of those questions, basically. I think the question gets a little more challenging if you're someone who, like we mentioned, maybe struggled a little bit in your first couple years. In that case, I think you want to secure the pass on level 1, right? Focus on level 1, focus on ComBank, ComQuest, sure, do some UWorld, but really focus on getting ready for COMLEX, because like it or not, there is an added stress and an added complexity to balancing 2 exams at once. And I'll be transparent with you. This is the first application cycle with a pass-fail step in level 1. So no one really knows how important step 1 is for DOs, right? It may come out to be that as long as you take step 2, you're kind of on even footing. We don't really know. I still recommend to all of my clients that, taking step 1 is going to open up doors for you. But if you're in a position where you potentially may end up failing level 1 because of it, that's not worth it. So kind of trying to, at the beginning, be realistic, talk to your tutor, talk to your school officials about how you've done so far and what you think is going to, do well for you going forward. Just to kind of close up, don't take it until you're ready. Pass fail, you can't redeem yourself with a killer score anymore. So you really want to get that pass the first time and get it behind you.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I have been doing this for a bit, and I will say that's actually been a lot of people's recommendations, people who have done level 1 and step 1, that same recommendation around a week or 2 in between. So it's really interesting to see so many people who have been successful with them, but have come to like the same conclusion independently. So I think there certainly is something to that. So, just going to talk a little bit about kind of what we do here at MedSchoolCoach. Also, again, we're almost to the Q&A. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A function and we'll get to them in a minute. But first, a little bit about what we do at MedSchoolCoach. So What we provide here is one-on-one tutoring. So we provide a personalized approach to each of our students and help them on all aspects of not only their exam preparation, but their path through medical school. So we help with preparing for their exams, creating your study schedule, creating a study plan, choosing resources, using resources, actually learning the content, and pretty much all things, both medical school for coursework and also for your exams as well. And so the way it works is you sign up for tutoring, and you get paired with one of our amazing tutors, Rebecca, Matthew, one of our other amazing tutors, and you work with them one-on-one. They get to know you. They understand what your strengths, they understand your weaknesses, and they work with you to help you make your way through your path through medical school, your coursework, through your board exams, whatever it is. They're there to kind of work with you one-on-one. And then once you have a plan, then they actually can work with you through content, help understand what you're struggling with and how to fix that. And so we've had an opportunity to work with thousands of students at this time. We've helped people be really successful in their preclinical coursework, their step 1, their level 1, step 2, level 2. And so we're really, really proud to have the opportunity to do that. This is kind of like what I already covered. If you want to hear more information about kind of what we do, there's a lot of information online. I really want to focus our webinar to kind of content, but if you want to learn more about our tutoring, what we offer as a company, you can scan this QR code, you can contact us, you can go on our website and read a bit more, and we'd be happy to kind of share more about what we offer as far as our tutoring programs. But again, I really want to focus our time here on our content and kind of what we're here to talk about, which is helping you guys be successful on level 1 and step 1. So if we can take a second, put your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to start working through them. I see one, I think that's a good one here that I'm going to toss over to you, Matthew. This is, I'm sure, a very complex answer, but in a nutshell, what is the difference between step 1 and level 1?
So I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of, this is a DO student asking me this, as in, how do the two tests differ, to someone who's taking both of them. Broadly speaking, COMLEX level 1 tends to have shorter question stems. It tends to sometimes not bombard you with quite as much, I don't want to say irrelevant, but they don't give you quite as much distractor information sometimes as the USMLE questions will present. At the same time, the COMLEX questions sometimes tend to require you to have a little more of a preconceived notion of what the test question writer is trying to ask you, in that you have to be familiar with the way they're asking that specific question, especially when it comes to some of the OMM concepts. I think both of the COMLEX question banks reference do a good job of exposing you to that kind of little more succinct question style, where you're trying to have to fill in more of the gaps yourself. But I do think that they are, subtly different enough that, we recommend people doing step 1. They should also do a step 1 Q bank. But that's like a broad overview of what I see as the differences. In terms of timing, they're both very similar in terms of the number of questions and the length. I mean, there are small variations, but they're both an all-day, 8-ish hour test, multiple choice. That's pretty consistent.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Rebecca, when you think about, you kind of talk through like choosing your resources, and you spoke through about a lot of different things. Do you have any particular advice on retaining information? So as you're making your way through these resources, Picmonic and sketching all these things, do you have like any tips and tricks that you tell your students about how to actually retain some of this information?
Absolutely. And I think retention is so important, because if you're just reading something or watching a video and it goes in one ear and out the other, that's not going to help you on the test, right? There has to be some kind of way that you're revisiting that information. And what a lot of students do that you may already be very familiar with is Anki. So you can download some Anki decks, and after you watch a video, you can do those decks that would be relevant to that. For other students, though, Anki is not the way that they learn, and that's actually something that's good to know about yourself and important to recognize early on. I'm one of the maybe outlier medical students that never really liked Anki. I'm very old school.
Me
My
too.
notes. Yeah, I review my notes, and that's what I do for content review. But it's not like I'm doing nothing, right? I'm still finding a way to revisit that information. And honestly, if you have been doing okay in the beginning of your medical school, you can see, oh, what are the study strategies that worked for me? Am I a flashcard person? Am I a note person? Some people like to create these like beautiful maps of like, this is the disease and this is the mutation that's associated with, and these are the symptoms. They like draw beautiful pictures on their iPad or something. Maybe that works for you, and that's what you can transfer to step 1 or level 1. But yes, I would definitely emphasize content retention as an important part of the studying process.
Yes, I'm the minority of this group. I use Donkey. I like Donkey. I can't say I like Donkey, but I used it and I found it effective. I kind of hate Donkey, but it was effective. Um, I always tell people that you need to have your method of memorization of small details, and that you want to try spending an hour or two every day with this. And this is a little different for everybody, but it's something that where you put all those little details that there's no understanding, there's just memorizing. There's some details in step 1 level 1 that there's no understanding this detail, you just have to memorize it. It's not the majority of the exam, but it's certainly a portion. And so I recommend that everyone develop a system. It could be Anki, it could be traditional flashcards, it could be reviewing your notes, it could be making tables. It's a little different for everybody, but developing your system that you put all these stupid little details onto or into, and you review them consistently every day for a little bit of time, an hour or two. So that's you doing your old school flashcards, you using Anki, you reviewing your notes, but trying to revisit that a little bit every day. So that you can you're not seeing it once and you look at it and you stare at it for 30 seconds, you say, I'm going to memorize this, but instead you see it a little bit every day. So whatever that method is, something where you feel like you could put all these little details and regularly revisit them, I think is critically important. This is another great question. I will ask Matthew's question, but how many UWorld questions should I try to complete and review per day in a 4 to 6 week dedicated period? What do you think about that?
Good question. Off the cuff, for most people, recommend starting around. I usually tell people to start around 2 blocks per day and then go up to 3 blocks per day after a couple weeks. So between 80 to 120 questions per day. That should be able to get you through all of UWorld in about 5 weeks. So that's generally my recommendation. If you're doing 40 or less per day, that's not enough. Some people can't do as many as I mentioned, and they go kind of in between and they just don't finish all of it. But ideally, I would say 80 to 100, maybe a little more. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yes, I would totally agree with you. And I also want to mention the point that one aspect of these exams is the endurance. Is like, can you sit for so many hours at a time just staring at questions? And that's another purpose of doing multiple question blocks in a day. And I would recommend you do them timed, and that you give yourself approximately the same amount of time during a break between those sections. So trying to do them back to back if you can, to just build up your endurance, because you don't want to be on test day and the main problem that you have is you can't sit still, right? You'll want that to be the least of your worries. So I would also add that aspect as well.
Do you guys have a rule for how much time should be spent reviewing a block of 40 questions?
I would say that as a generous estimate, the amount of time that you spend reviewing can be the same as the amount of time you did the question. So about an hour. And when you're reviewing, you do want to try to ask yourself, what's the reason that I'm getting this wrong? Is it because of a content deficiency, in which case maybe write that down on a post-it or something so that you know that you have to review that. Or if it's a strategy thing, then you need to be aware of that as well, because yes, we make silly mistakes, but if you're making the same kind of error over and over, you're just not reading the question correctly or something like that, that's something that you need to be aware of to stop making that mistake moving forward.
Yeah, I usually say if you're spending less than like an hour and a half, then you're probably not spending enough time. And I think, just because you got a question right doesn't mean there's not something you can't learn from it. And were you between two answers? Were you between three? Did you just guess and get it right? Because that's nice for like your UWorld percentage, and it will be nice for the actual exams. That's not a bad thing. But I think when you're using these question banks, you're using them as a tool to learn. So I tell people usually around 2 hours, 3 or more hours, you're probably not being efficient enough. And I think less than an hour, you're probably skipping through a lot of things that are really valuable. That's my general approach to kind of how long it should take to review question banks. Matthew, you mentioned this a bit earlier, but does somebody have to take USMLE and COMLEX, and what particularly would drive someone to do both?
So by have to, you do not need to take USMLE to graduate from med school. You do not need to take USMLE to match your residency or get a license to practice. So no, you do not have to. If you are interested or think you will be interested in any specialty other than pretty much most specialties other than like FM, family medicine, and some internal medicine programs, if you don't want academic, this is a huge generalization. You should take USMLE. It can only help you. Even in the specialties I just mentioned, it will make you more competitive at programs that historically have only looked at USMLE. So it does depend on your career goals. But I would say any mid-tier or up competitive specialty, it's almost like a requirement. There's becoming less and less things for people to differentiate themselves by. And having, the USMLE exams on your transcript to show that you're able to meet that mark, I think can really help you when securing interviews when you're going for residency.
I think that makes sense. Rebecca, do you think UWorld alone is sufficient to pass step one?
I saw that question, and I think that a little bit more context is needed. Are they using UWorld as a content resource and a question resource, or are they using a content resource and then UWorld as the sole question resource? If it's the latter, I think that could be fine to pass step one. But I would still encourage that student to use the CBSSA exams as well, just for that sense of confidence directly from the NBME. However, if the student meant it with the first option of can I use UWorld as my primary content resource and my question resource, I would recommend against that, because I think that it is much more beneficial to have separate content and question resources. If you're doing UWorld in the very beginning and you're really slow and you're just using that to learn the information for the first time, it's not going to be an effective percent, right, when you're looking at that score.
Great. And Matthew, you answered this a second ago. If you're thinking about you're an osteopathic medical student, you want to apply to a really competitive specialty. Now, obviously, level one and step one are both pass fail now. So I'm assuming that the only real benefit of taking step one is that would then allow you to take step two CK. Is that correct?
I actually disagree with that. I think for any even mid-tier competitive specialty, anything that can be used to count against you or filter you out is going to be used for that purpose. And when you're competing against hundreds to thousands of applicants who all passed step one, which is the exam the program director is familiar with on the first try, and you don't have it, that is an easy way to get you not secured an interview. I think it's still unquestionably you have to take it. It's possible in 5 years we'll have enough data to say, hey, program directors don't really care. But right now, when I advise my clients, I think I'd be doing you a disservice to tell you can just disregard it. I don't think that's where we are yet.
Makes sense. Rebecca, how many full-length practice tests do you typically suggest your students take?
That is a great question, and I would love to hear everybody's input on that. There's no technically correct answer here. I usually will have my students take one practice exam a week just to see their progress. But for some students, maybe if they're really, really not improving between practice tests, it could be beneficial to skip 1 week of practice exams and focus a lot on content and UWorld and then take a practice exam in 2 weeks, for example. If you take a practice exam every day, that is probably not going to be effective and you're going to run out of practice exams really quick. But the exact frequency is something that I think is different for every student. And we can definitely help advise you on that if you do decide to do tutoring. But would love to hear insights on that.
What do you think, Matthew?
I agree with Rebecca. I think with some exceptions, I mean, not every day, but I do think like more is better. I think taking a lot of practice exams is good. It helps prepare you, build stamina. I usually do like one per weekend, or it could be during the week, whatever works for the client. And then usually leading up to the test, maybe do like two, kind of like 3 in like 10 days. But broadly speaking, yeah, I would say most of the people I work with have done, between 5, 6, or 7, full length by the time they take their test. And I think for most of them, it really helps them to feel that much more confident, right? One of the goals of test day is to eliminate the variables. You want test day to feel just like your practice sessions. And doing more practice full lengths helps you be in the mindset of being ready to take the test. So I think it's really important to take a lot of practice tests. And a lot of times we have people come to us who maybe had challenges the first time they took step 1 or level 1. And a lot of times what we hear is people, oh, I took 1 practice test, or I didn't take any practice test. It's kind of a common theme. So I definitely think that's important to do a decent number of practice tests.
Yeah. My approach as practice tests is I don't think they're great learning tools. I think like the practice tests itself, like I think when you're thinking about questions to learn from, I think UWorld phenomenal, Amboss phenomenal, great explanations, pictures, tables, everything you need. So when you think of practice tests, I think about, well, what is the goal of taking a practice test? Well, I think one is to assess, where I am, right? So like Rebecca said, am I going to change in a day? So taking it every day is probably not going to be helpful, but maybe once a week or once every other week to track progress. Am I moving in the right direction? Am I making progress? I think is something that's important. And I think when you're getting up to the exam, it becomes more important. It is also important if you're someone who is struggling to pass and you're trying to figure out, should I take my exam now or should I delay? Because the best way to figure that out is to take a practice exam. That's the most accurate kind of a guesstimate that you're going to have. And so in that case, it makes sense to take a lot more practice exams as you get closer to your test date. Are you consistently passing? If you're consistently passing, take your exam. If you're consistently not passing, or you've only passed one of your practice exams, then and you're a couple days or a week before, then that may encourage you to actually to delay your exam. And the third reason is really what Matthew had said is, and Rebecca, both folks said that, is that one aspect of this is training yourself. And just like, an athlete would, they practice and then they play, and you want to practice the way you play. And, if you can nail 1 block of questions every day, it's a lot different when you're faced with 6 blocks for that day. And I find that it's really important to at least practice that before you go to this foreign place and sit with this random computer in this super awkward, uncomfortable situation, and you're doing 6 blocks at once for the first time ever. I think that is something you have a lot of control of before, forget the content and all these things. You can at least sit there and try to be doing 6 blocks at a time so you can take that kind of variable out of there. So I think that is really phenomenal advice. And, we're getting at the top of the hour now, and I want to respect everyone's time. I just really want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Matthew. You, I think, provided a lot of just really priceless insight. I think that was gained over several years of experience working with a bunch of students. I think, what you brought was just amazing. And hopefully everyone here found it enjoyable and educational. And hopefully they're going to take all those tips and tricks, apply it to their own studies, and smash level 1 and step 1, and then move on to smash level 2 and step 2 as well. So thank you everyone for joining us, our panelists and also our attendees.
Thank you all for being here. Take care.
Have a great night, everyone.
All right, guys, you take care. If you want to learn anything more about Med School Coach, QR code is there. We will send you some additional information, including a recording of the video. But good luck, everyone. Thanks again for joining. You take care.